how many of you, in all honesty, got a chance to read the Devar Torah in your email, since it's not in your leaflet, but you got a chance to see it in your email? It's an opportunity to really think about how the Bible gave birth to Netflix. It's so clear that these Torah portions about Joseph and all the family drama between him and his parents and him and his brothers and all the ups and downs that leave you on the edge of your seat, even if you've read through these chapters of Genesis dozens or hundreds of times, it's still, you can feel the drama building, you can feel the sibling rivalry, you can feel the father's love for a son and the fear that he had lost him and that he'd been, what did the brothers tell his father happened to him? Okay, Rabbi, what did they tell his father that happened to him? They show him, right, a part of his coat of many colors, right, and say that he must have been devoured by a wild beast. But in fact, what had they done to him? See, this is a knowledgeable group. Aren't you impressed? Threw him into the pit, and then what? They actually threw him into a pit and left him for thinking he would eventually die. And what happened in the meantime? The Ishmaelites came by and took him. They took him. They sold him into slavery. They just were guilty of trafficking. I just want to be clear. And you could even say, when you read this week's Torah portion, that each character, and the Ishmaelites too, played a particular role in allowing Jewish history to emerge, right? But actually, two of the brothers come back and want to save him from the pit because they felt guilty. Guilt is a theme through all this stuff. Jewish guilt? I don't know. I think this is like above and beyond Jewish guilt. And they come back, but he actually had disappeared. They didn't know what happened to him, which is actually very important for how the story develops this week. So, right, he's thrown into a pit. He's taken up out of the pit. He's brought down to Egypt. Then what happens to him? He resists the seduction of his boss's wife. Some say it's because he wasn't heterosexual. Some say because Cantor Gerber. Did you just say that out loud? Did everybody hear what he said? I'm just going to put it slightly differently if you don't mind. He wasn't attracted to her. He wasn't attracted. It doesn't say that in the Bible, though, people. It doesn't say that anywhere in the Bible. In fact, she might have been very attractive, because actually for Joseph to have resisted that seduction, if she was really beautiful, makes him an even greater hero, right? As if resisting seduction of somebody who's not your wife makes you a hero. But anyway, you see the problem there? Just doing the right thing. Anyway, he then, right, is accused of having done that, of having slept with her. So where does he find himself? In another pit, in another dark place. And then, fortune telling? Dream interpretation. Thank you, Dr. Freud. Freud was very educated in Jewish tradition. There's all kinds of Jewish themes throughout Freud's work. Is there any expert in Freud here tonight? We can discuss that some other time with a real expert in the room. But what do we find out? What did you say? Am I missing some good commentary? No? So he finds out that he's very, very good at dream interpretation. And that actually it's more than dream interpretation, it's how dreams actually can predict the future. And it turns out he's pretty good at this, so good at this, that actually he eventually gets released and gets rewarded, and he's brought from the lowness, right? You feel the roller coaster? From another low point in prison to the high point of being the visor, which means what? He was the minister of the economy. He was the treasurer, what would be the, he was a thank you, Secretary of the Treasury for the whole nation, and it turns out that he actually is not just good at predicting the future through dreams, he actually is a brilliant economist, right? When there are 7 good years, what should you do? I say this because have you been listening to all the famine reports, where famine, especially in parts of Africa, is just worse than it's ever been, right? So, but prepare for, largely for war reasons, for reasons of wars between different nations and different militias within those nations, but also because of climate. But Joseph, way back when in Egypt, knew that when things are good, bless you, when things are good, you should prepare for years that are likely to come when there will be famine. And so he creates the first historical, there actually is some archaeological evidence of this, that was the time that we have the first historical evidence of storing grain. Just in case you think this is all a Bubba-misis. Apparently there's more and more historical evidence. I'm not going to tell you about the historical evidence that proves that that can't possibly be true, but if you want to, you could just follow the path of the archaeological evidence that shows that actually it was in that time and in that place where humanity was so settled and had a sense of the future and had also plenty. You can only save if you have more than enough for now, or if you're willing to live, right, not excessively in the present. So now there's a famine in the land where he came from, right? You hear that the land of Israel is also going through cycles of famine. The land is also experiencing this roller coaster, just like Joseph is. And of course, there's this parallel to the history of the Jewish people, that there are years when it feels that we are in a dark, cold place. And there are years when we are lifted high and have such plenty and such success and such possibilities. So in this week's Torah portion, Joseph finds himself at the height of power and of resources, and then those brothers who had, most of them, the brothers who had thrown him into the pit in the first place years earlier, come asking for his help. Now, if your enemy, who almost killed you, who actually thought they killed you, because he was gone when they came back, comes to ask you for something, what would be the human response to the enemy coming to ask you for help? Thank you, Kim, for your honesty. Sorry, but no. I gave at the office, right? Or worse, actually off with your heads because you're guilty of attempted murder of me way back when, Joseph might have said to them. But in fact, he uses the whole situation, he manipulates them. He plays off the situation of them not realizing who he is to play out an even more grand drama. How is it possible that they can't see who he is? How is that even possible? That's one of the great dramas of this moment in the Torah. What do you think? How is it that they come to Egypt years later asking for food, find themselves in front of the Secretary of the Treasury, and they don't realize that it's their own brother, same father, different mother, but same mother as Benjamin. Joseph and Benjamin's mother was Rachel. I just had to throw that in. The most beloved is the most beloved son of the most beloved wife. But anyway, why don't they recognize who he is? Because he dressed, thank you, Philip. Because he dressed like an Egyptian. I have to repeat this for all the folks joining us on Zoom. And therefore they don't recognize him? They, first of all, certainly did not expect him there. They're not looking for him. No, it's a really deep psychological thing. He's their brother. He's got the same eyes that he had when they threw him into the pit, and he probably looked up at them like, why didn't they recognize him? What are you saying, Leah?
They thought it was impossible. If you think something's impossible and you're confronted with something else,
If it doesn't even dawn on them, it's an impossible situation. It couldn't possibly be him. We had another hand up. Yes, Jeff, what? Totally out of context, right? You can meet, how many times does this happen to any of us, right? Someone that you met in one context sees you in another place and you're like, they seem familiar, but totally out of context, but it's your brother. Yeah, Courtney. Oh, they've actually... So they've become, thank you, did you all hear that? They actually have all become different people. They really have become different people. They carry themselves differently. They had gone through different things in the meantime. Joseph was no longer the person that they left him to be. He was alone in the pit versus how was he in Egypt? Surrounded by people. There are people that have to interpret for him, right? Because he's pretending he doesn't speak their language. There's a melitz, an interpreter between them. So he's surrounded by people. He's dressed like an Egyptian. He's probably carrying himself completely differently. And the brothers, that's the easy one. What's happened to the brothers? Why do you say the brothers are any different? No, really. How are the brothers different? Or are they? Yes, please, Roz.
They are regrets, and they are completely different. They're starving, and they're not doing very well.
They're starving, they're not doing well, they're probably bent low. But if they're that different, maybe he shouldn't have recognized them either, right? But they have transformed. They are now not feeling so strong. They're desperate. They need help. Anne? Wait, hang on a second. Pardon? All these years, they have lived with their father's grief and their own guilt, right? Now think about that. You're living with someone who's suffering, and it's your fault. So something has happened to them as well. And we had another point over here before we go on, Debbie?
Their expectations were different. Joseph had no reason to expect that his brothers were dead.
Hang on a second. Joseph had no expectation that his brothers were dead. Right.
His brothers had no expectation.
Right, that he could possibly be there.
So for him, for Joseph to recognize them, especially when they say who they are from, is a very different experience than seeing someone coming back from the dead, basically.
So imagine their surprise. When, what does he say to them? He actually realizes, he actually has three goals. And it is though he realizes eventually when he's forced to explain who, he didn't have to reveal himself to them, right? And he actually does for two important reasons. But he actually is so overcome with emotion that he leaves the room to go weep. He's so emotional. And he says, he reveals himself in two ways. The first way he says is, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? Because imagine what Joseph's been living through. Not only this roller coaster of being in the pit and brought high and bringing in the pit and brought high, but is he's lost his father. So he wants to know that. Then he says, in case that wasn't clear, who he is, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. So I am the victim of your behavior. I am your brother. So it sounds like he's completely feeding into their narrative, their sense of themselves as their identity of being the oppressor, the one who sold their own brother away, threw him in the pit anyway. But then he says the following very surprising thing. Now Do not be distressed or reproach yourselves because you sold me here. It was to save life that God sent me ahead of you. What is he doing? So he's taking the burden off their shoulders. Well, first he's saying, I am your brother, and I know what you did to me. And you should know what you did to me. But do not be distressed or reproach yourselves. Meaning, maybe they've lived with the guilt long enough. And do not criticize yourselves, because actually you were just part of a bigger plan. So that I could go, and this is part of it that I never really remember until I see it every year. It was to save life that God sent me ahead of you, right? God knew that this was all going to happen. And the only way that this family, our family of ancestors, would survive would be if somebody went ahead and could establish themselves outside the land of Israel, establish themselves, become people of means, become a person with access to means in that case, in order to ultimately be able to save their lives. It's one of the many stories of the inside and the outside of the land of Israel, right? Who needs who and when and how. And there's this mutual interdependence, really, because Joseph still needs them. Why? And this will be the last part for now. Why? At least until tomorrow morning. Torah study at 8:30. Why does he still need them, Sharon? He is still forever, even posthumously, wants to go home. He still needs his homeland, and he still needs his father. And there's one thing that we haven't gotten to, which is his little brother. His little brother. He wants to reunite with his full brother. He is not complete. No matter all the riches in Egypt, he is incomplete without his connection to the land and without his connection to his family. So there's this huge reunion that's happening both in a individual sense, in a familial sense, in a national sense, and also in a cosmic sense. It's this pattern of the experience of life and the experience of our people, sometimes low, sometimes high, sometimes far away, and sometimes brought home and brought near to one another once again. But Joseph, on his deathbed, asks for one thing. He says, one day, God will bring us all, not knowing that there's about to be slavery, et cetera, centuries of slavery. He says, do not leave my bones here. When you someday leave, take my bones with you back to the land of Israel. Even posthumously, he wants to go home. And there's this sense throughout this whole narrative, which is better than any Netflix show you will ever see, including the one I watched an entire season of yesterday. It's true. Oh my God, it's so from the Bible, I'm going to tell you. It wasn't Succession, although it seems like that. That is totally based on the Bible. By the way, every great movie, every great book, every Netflix series, it's got these core biblical themes all over it, don't they, though? Think about that. It wasn't Succession, it was, what's it called? Arrested Development. Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. And do you see the similarities? Do you think about it for a minute? Do you see the similarities? The siblings, one's this, one's that, the father. In this case, anyway, I don't want to, no spoiler alerts, but if you ever want to talk about all the parallels between Arrested Development and the story of Joseph, I'm your person. On that note, may we all experience this holiday season, whether we feel in a low or dark place, or whether we feel better than we've ever felt before, to be aware not only of the human condition of the roller coaster of life, but may we always remember that we have the power to help each other from those low places, from those dark places, to places of great light. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach.